Quantum DevOps. The sort of general theme here is that it's not really much different from normal DevOps. Also appreciate there's been 2 talks already today on hacking and abusing DevOps systems and pipelines. We need to be careful what we say, and this isn't part of the CTF, so don't get any ideas. So I'm Tom. I've been working for OQC as DevOps engineer and Senior DevOps engineer for 2.5 years. This is Kristian. He's been here for 2 years. This talk, there's not going to be any quantum in this talk. There's not going to be any maths. No PhDs here. We're just going to be talking about what it's like to operationally run a superconducting quantum computer as a service. One more. Who are OQC? Quick introduction to OQC. We basically build and run quantum computers. That's what the company does. We built Europe's first QCaaS system. That was back in July 2001. Lucy was the first QPU available on AWS Bracket in Europe. That was back in March 2022. And in November, we launched Toshiko, a 32-qubit system. That's in 3 data centers, sort of globally at the moment. There's also the Toshiko marks us moving, and this is going to be another theme to this talk. Lucy was very much a lab-based system. It ran in a lab. Each component had its own owner that would look at it every day, so check that it was okay. We're now running in multiple data centers. Needs to be much more sort of enterprise ready. We'll be talking a lot more about that as we continue. Why are we here? We're here for a GothCon tonight, I think, maybe Hacker Jeopardy. It's our 3rd year at DEF CON. For the past 2 years, we've come here and we've provided Lucy for the capture of the flag. If you're doing the capture of the flag, you used to be able to run stuff and run it on Lucy live in real time. This year, we've got access to Toshiko, the CTF, so same thing. And super top secret quantum set. I'm going to hand over to Kristian. He's going to do some talking now. So.
Yeah, so this next diagram is a little bit complex, detailed. You might want to stand a little bit close. So, although this is a joke, this is not too dissimilar to what's actually deployed. As a DevOps team, obviously we like to streamline and simplify stuff while making it a bit less simple. So it actually looks a little bit more like this. I don't know if you want to go through. So again, talking about going from the lab to data center deployments. We've got 2 data centers. There is a 3rd one as well that isn't on this diagram. But yeah, so back in the old days of the lab, we ran a little bit of this up here. Not much, about half of it.
Get the microphone out.
Ooh. And a little bit of this in a lab rather than a data center, and that connected to that through a point-to-site VPN, and that worked and it was fine. But now we've deployed into multiple data centers. You'll see that there's a lot more blue things there, which represents Kubernetes. We run with DevOps. So we run sort of Kubernetes everywhere now, and this isn't because we particularly like Kubernetes. Yeah, it's just it's a means to an end. We like deploying containers. We like having a unified process. So we deploy code exactly the same way as we deploy code in the cloud to K3S running on a piece of hardware in the data center. Yeah, I guess what we're trying to do is we're sort of striving for sort of GitOps processes. We haven't quite got there yet, but running containers everywhere throughout the whole stack helps us to get there.
A slightly more simple diagram here. Previous one showed multiple deployments. This is just an example of one. I'll sort of break down each individual layer and then some vulnerabilities and possible exploits at each of the layers that we sort of have to consider. So starting from left-hand side, got the user layer. So we've got how our users access us. We've got a client, it's a Python library, direct integration to the REST API, and we have UI front end. At this layer, we've also got some monitoring tools that access the API, and also other parts of the stack. And then we have some tools as well that the other teams use for measurements, calibrations, and some physics-y quantum stuff. So, vulnerabilities, possible exploits at this sort of layer that we have to consider would be supply chain stuff, Python library, phishing, fairly obvious, lateral movement with the monitoring layer, accessing all sorts of different parts of the stack. Mitigations, fairly standard. We got training against phishing, strict release workflow for supply chain, and obviously strict network policies for our monitoring tools. Next layer, probably the most DevOps influenced one. We have REST API, obviously Kubernetes. It's hosted on the cloud. We also have an on-prem offering, a UI portal, authentication billing. Microservices, obviously, with DevOps. We've got the main server, which handles the requests, does all the moving between the database and stuff. We have identity for the authentication, compiler that does optimizations and stuff for your chasm and all that. And a scheduler, self-explanatory. And the tasks are stored in the messaging system, message queue, database. So vulnerabilities, possible exploits at this layer. Way too many to list because it is a web API. This is DEF CON. I'm not going to talk through the OS 10, so I assume you guys know that. Mitigations, all fairly standard at this point still, so we've got the basics, vulnerability scanning, scheduled, we have it in the CI workflows, dynamic, static, all that stuff. Got pen tests, everything that we all know. However, this is where it starts to get a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more interesting, where we sort of don't really know what to do from a DevOps standpoint. Here we have, at the control layer, we have the receiver, which is a physical server running the receiver application, pulling tasks from the message queue, passing them through our custom drivers, through the FPGA cards, through RF hardware, which sends microwave to and from the QPU, and it does some funky RF stuff, which we're still not completely aware of from in our team. So yeah, vulnerabilities, possible exploits that we have to consider as a DevOps team here. Remote code execution, so this is we're a little bit more scared of this sort of layer because we've got user input coming in from the receiver application fairly close to our hardware. Physical attacks, obviously. We're not on the cloud anymore. Supply chain, so some of the equipment used at this sort of layer isn't all enterprise-ready hardware, stuff that you can just commercially available. It's usually for universities, custom built, that sort of stuff. So something to consider. Denial of service. So we have custom built RF equipment, but the FPGAs are sort of at risk. I don't know if there's any ham radio geeks here, but standing wave ratio between the coax. I don't know if something to look into, I think. And then prior FPGA cards, which don't do that. Yeah, so mitigations at this layer that we've implemented, building security, we've deployed into a data center, so we don't really need to worry too much about that. That's taken care of for us. Strict internal firewall policies between all the different on-prem servers, fairly obvious. And now that we've Kubernetes-ified stuff, we have to get a little bit more in depth by deploying service messages. Because we've got multiple applications running close to our hardware. They need to access their own other services. Don't want to give them access to everything. Oh, here's a picture of Lucy, the control stack that we just talked about. This is our previous gen quantum computer. You've probably seen this picture before, I think, in the previous talk. So this is the final layer where the interesting stuff happens, where we have minimal influence from DevOps, which we want to change. This stack, this layer of the stack, we have the cryo hardware, which has cold RF hardware, big fridge, which is majority of this layer, and obviously the quantum processor. So vulnerabilities, possible exploits at this layer that we as DevOps engineers have to consider and mitigate would be, I don't know, how do we mitigate that? I don't know. Oh, this is Chico actually. A little bit nicer, more streamlined design. I don't actually know if we're allowed to show that picture. I've seen it.
We'll find out.
Yeah, so it's not strictly accurate that we don't know. We've sort of gone full circle where most of these things we have to consider would be physical. So pretty obvious stuff we have. I'm not going to do that all, you guys know this stuff. Physical access, which is mentioned before. We've got fridges that are quite important for the operating of our quantum computers. If they've been tampered with, warm up, that's not going to be good. Quite a few days of delay happens. Side channel attacks, we've got obviously we've got microwave signals going over coax directly from the control hardware to the quantum computer, leaky RF injection perhaps. This I've mentioned, EMPs, solar storms we've had experience with before as well, and insider threats obviously. Cool.
Yeah, so that's, as mentioned earlier, DevOps 2.5 years ago started on this sort of side, and has slowly been sort of encroaching over to this side. So with how put in sort of configuration management, sort of infrastructure as code that we do over here, we're sort of pushing that over there. And also sort of monitoring. There was no good monitoring to speak of. Obviously, we don't want to go into sort of general monitoring. We all know about that. But there's a couple of things that are kind of specific to quantum computing, I guess. So we got what we call fridge exporters. So these effectively provide information on lots of temperatures, as you can imagine, pressures, pump speed, sort of fridge states. They can change state without telling anyone, so we like to be alerted when that happens. The old fridge exporter was just sort of a Python script, effectively. It was just running on a machine that sat next to the fridge, and it would occasionally send reports to Slack and some messages to Slack, and that's pretty much all it did. We've now sort of rewritten it. It's now containerized. It runs on-prem, on K3S, on Proxmox. It polls the fridge hardware for data points, converts that data into Prometheus readable metrics, and exposes that to Prometheus. And that's obviously available on Grafana. And also it sends out alerts and callouts. So now if a fridge starts warming up, people get called out about it, rather than we find out when it's too late. A fridge warm-up's a very bad thing to happen, and it takes a long time to, you tend to have to do a full cycle of warming up, cooling it back down again, and that's days, possibly weeks. We don't like that to happen. This is quite an interesting one. We can definitely do a lot more with this. So this is the benchmarking data, which isn't new, but we now capture that benchmarking data. So at the moment, it's just periodically run. Sometimes it's run manually when people want to see what the sort of system health is. It basically tells us what the system of the QPU is, and each individual qubit. So it's like being able to peer into the fridge. And this is something that, if you want to get the full health of the stack, it's easy enough to monitor the control hardware, in traditional ways. Monitoring stuff inside the fridge is going to be difficult. Benchmarking gives us that. Again, all we do with the data is we turn it into Prometheus readable metrics, expose it to Prometheus and Grafana. We get some lovely graphs. There's a lot more work that we can do here to take more advantage of this. If you like benchmarks, those are the benchmarks we run. The other thing that we started doing fairly recently was FPGA monitoring. This is just the temperatures of the FPGA cards. If they get too hot, they tend to break. Rather than an exporter, the way the drivers for the FPGA cards are configured at the moment, the data just comes out in logs. But we can still use that, that's fine. So we get the log updated per task that's run on each FPGA card. This is read by Promtail. If you know what that is, it's a sort of agent that effectively reads logs and ships them to Loki, which is a centralized logging system. To get logs and data out of logs, you have to do some sort of horrible regex to get that into a sort of time series representation, which we can view in Grafana. I did have a look at this. I was told that it was horrible, but it's not that bad actually. So it's quite understandable. However, DevOps do prefer metrics, I prefer metrics to logs. I spent far too many years looking at logs. I don't want to do it anymore. And we send alerts on this as well, which is very useful to the guys that look after the FPGA cards. Something else that this is quite mundane, but it's something that I've never had to do before, and that's monitor PDUs. So this is what provides power to cabinets in data centers. So we have our own cabinets in the data center. Normally you would probably rely on the data center itself to do this monitoring, but we have to do it. Well, we don't have to, but we do. And again, we just use a standard SNMP exporter to do this. Again, people don't usually monitor PDUs. We monitor power draw. Apparently, so we've been told, power draw could be an early signal to hardware failure. So yes, we're monitoring and alerting on that now. Next year's plans. This is plans for OQC. This is if we, hypothetically, if we were to come back next year and do a similar talk. Hopefully, we'll be talking about much improved monitoring and alerting. Maybe not alerting, but certainly monitoring the QPU itself, and hopefully doing more interesting things around that. Qubit fingerprinting, this is something Kristian is particularly interested in. So yeah, we might be talking about that, maybe possibly even doing a live demonstration perhaps. Run more things in Kubernetes, yeah, why not? Gate circuit derivation through leaky RF. That's another possible pre-demonstration that we could do and then bring with us. Hybrid computing, that's something we've been doing at OQC. We should get more involved with that, so maybe we'll be talking about that next year as well. Q&A time.
Thank you.
Oh, it's exactly 24 minutes.
That was interesting. So, do we have any questions? You're burning questions on DevOps. Sorry. Don't worry.
Oh no.
Two questions. First, okay, so the first question is, do you handle authentication or do you leave that up to AWS?
For the AWS system, AWS, we're not on AWS anymore, but they used to handle authentication. But for our own customers, we have our own authentication system, yes.
Okay, so my question is, how do you handle authentication for automations? Not for users, like using a password, but how do you allow machines to run code on the backend?
So there's using passwords that or you do that sort of stuff for logging into the portal, which you can then generate API tokens with and use that in your programmatic access.
Okay, so that would be for a user, right? But do you allow automations to run periodically without user input?
Yes, through the API tokens you can create.
Are there any other questions for OQC? This is the end of a very long day. So give it up once more, Tom, Kristian. Thank you.